You probably know that landscape architects work with plants. We do and we love it, but we use them in really interesting ways that you may not have realized. And we do so much more than pick out plants. In this podcast series, we invite professionals in our field to talk about what excites them about the profession of landscape architecture and the wide variety of things they do. We will explore the many ways that landscape architects positively impact the world. Landscape architecture is a diverse practice that shapes the way we experience and move through our cities and communities, guides our responses to climate and environmental changes, brings forward our public histories, and so much more. We at the University of Colorado Denver Department of Landscape Architecture are excited that you are interested in our field. Please join us as we discover what many people don't know about landscape architecture.
We are joined today by Theodore Hoerr, founder of Terrain Work based in New York City. Theodore's body of work ranges from large-scale urban strategies to reshape the future of cities to landscapes and public art installations that emphasize the craft of building. His professional and academic work explores how landscape's innate ability to change creates new emergent forms and experiences that synthesize culture, nature, and the built environment. Hey, Theodore, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you, Amanda?
I'm doing great. Let's jump into some questions. Tell us about how your background and where you grew up and how that influenced your ideas about landscape and art.
Well, I grew up on a nursery in central Illinois, just outside of Peoria. My dad and my grandfather started a design build company in the late 1950s, and that grew into cultivating their own plants. So, hence, I grew up on a nursery. They had garden centers, so they did landscape contracting and landscape design. I knew what a landscape architect was from a really young age, and they did maintenance. And growing up, I worked in all facets of the family business, as you could imagine. And I grew up around plants. I played in plants. The nursery was kind of also my big giant playground. So plants had a really big influence on me. Um, and I did things like starting out working in the tree fields, cultivating plants, moving irrigation lines. I sold plants in the garden center and tended to plants in the garden center, and also ultimately worked on construction crews, constructing landscapes. So, growing up on the nursery had like a really big impact on me, sort of imbuing a love of the horticulture aspects of plants. But I think even maybe more importantly, um, the idea of growing up on a nursery sort of lent itself to me viewing landscapes in a very legible way. A nursery I would almost equate to a formal French garden, the way plants are arranged, the way they shape space, and the cultivation practices. There's some real similarities there. I think the other aspect about growing up on a nursery that was pretty interesting was like I got to see this notion of landscape changing in real time and almost very an accelerated change. So, um, seeing the trees being grown from young saplings up to mature trees, the trees being harvested every fall, the trees being rotated so different species would end up different places, the tree blocks would shift and shape. So not only seeing the plants change through the seasons, but actually seeing the cultivation practices enacting change on the land itself. So that to me kind of opened up, I think, a lot of possibilities and really sort of opened up my view to what a landscape could be in the future.
Yeah, you've done some incredibly beautiful work that some might say is more art than landscape. How did you get into landscape artwork?
Um, I would say from early on when I was studying landscape architecture in undergrad at University of Illinois, and understanding the history of landscape architecture and some of the people that were influencing the profession, that had a really big impact on me. So figures like Dan Kiley, Garrett Ekbo, Peter Walker, and Martha Schwartz. And one of the commonalities between some of these people that I sort of admired was their practices and how they were linked to different artistic movements. So, for example, Dan Kiley in the Distill movement, Peter Walker with minimalism, Martha Schwartz with pop art and op art. And it started to get me to think about, looking at the work of some of these individuals, like how you could blend this notion of landscape with fine art. And so the boundaries between what is fine art and what is landscape architecture get very blurry. And that always really appealed to me. I also, started to get into um, other, artistic movements and looking into the history of those, such as the earthworks from 1960s and 70s. Um, People like Michael Heiser, Robert Smithson, Walter DeMaria. I think they really, they profoundly influenced me, and they profoundly influenced the um, the the whole I guess melee of artistic movements where they said we're rejecting the gallery system, we're rejecting this idea of both art as a commodity, but also art displayed in four walls in a museum. And they moved out to the West and started doing large scale artworks in the landscape. And some of the things I took away from them and this group of artists was their artworks were legible, so they were visible on the landscape. That was one thing. I think although for me, what the really intriguing aspect of these artworks was how they sort of co-opted elements of time and change as almost materials in the artworks themselves. I thinking about landscape architecture in a project and the whole process of a project, from conceptualization to construction to the life of the project being a piece of performance art, really appealed to me. Um, and then the people I work with obviously had a really big impact on me. A few of those, such as Rich Haig, when I worked in Rich's office, coming straight out of undergrad. He did projects prior to me that were, profoundly impactful on the profession of landscape architecture, Gasworks Park and the Blowdell Reserve, and projects that I got a deep understanding of that really conveyed a set of ideas to people and were thought-provoking. And then later on in my career, I was a principal in Diana Balmori's office before I launched my own office. And she ran her office like an atelier art studio, and where representation of the projects was as important as the project itself. And the representation was an artwork in itself, in this really interesting interplay between representation and actualization. And then when I launched my own office, Terrain Work, here in Manhattan, now 10 years ago, we've been in business for a decade. We could have a whole nother podcast on that, on launching a firm, but it really confronts you with ideas of what you want your firm to be, what kind of voice do you want to have in the profession of landscape architecture. And I think with my firm, in my office, uh, the sort of the voice or the inflection of the work is really um, to have ecosystem services in all of our projects and to try to engage those to really confront the very real ideas we're dealing with and pressing ideas we're dealing with through climate change. But beyond that, that's kind of baseline in all of our projects. But beyond that, um, how we could have each one of our projects hopefully be somewhat thought-provoking and for people to take away experiencing a landscape in a new way.
Were there any projects that you were really nervous about on install? And how do you know if the project will work?
I think that nervousness can also be it can also be equated to excitement. And I think that's one of the beauties of what we do in our profession. For me, it's fun to see that tension between a conceptual idea and how that unfolds in real time and space in 3 dimensions. And I think there's always some surprises along the way. I don't think you can perfectly plan how a project comes to life, and sometimes the project gets shaped in unexpected ways, shaped by the contractor, shaped by the budget, also shaped by the way people use it. I think you can try to imagine all the possibilities of how people are going to use your project, and you still won't tap into the whole host of ways people are going to engage with your project. I think probably one project that I could use as an example, for this excitement or nervous energy would be Gravity Field. We did an installation. It's about 3 hours north of Quebec City for a botanical garden. It's called Jardins Matisse. And they have a garden festival every year. And they open up an international competition to select a few people that will present in their garden festival. We were fortunate enough to win with Gravity Field. This is back in 2021. And Gravity Field was taking 172 sunflowers and growing them upside down. And the idea there was really, how can plants thrive in the harshest conditions? And, faced with obviously this climate crisis we have, how can we use plants in really unexpected ways? So it was meant to be thought-provoking in that manner of how plants are really adaptable and how we'll need them to be adaptable in the future. So how they can change, how they can adapt phototropically, heliotropically, and gravitropically. And we did this on a shoestring budget. And our proof of concept for knowing if the sunflowers would uh, succeed was a obscure YouTube video from a gentleman in Ireland. He grew one sunflower upside down. So that was our proof of concept. So we had no idea if this was going to succeed. And I think that was the exciting part about it. It was an experiment in real time. And I think that sort of probably displays some of we encourage experimentation in each one of our works. We try to take chances on each one of our projects, and you just hope that succeeds.
Did the sunflowers end up growing?
Yes, they did, in fact. The sunflowers all ended up growing. The installation was a big hit, and it has been displayed at Jardins Matisse every year since.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, Theodore, I think that's all the questions we had. Thanks for joining us and answering our questions on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, well, talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to our podcast, Something Else About Landscape Architecture. The Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Colorado, Denver offers multiple paths of study to fit your career aspirations. We invite you to visit our website, ucdenver.edu/landscape, or follow us on Instagram at CUDenver Landscape Arch.